The first time Cora saw Millie, the autoclave sighed like a tired animal and the whole office smelled faintly of eugenol, sweet and clove bitter, the scent that got under your skin no matter how carefully you washed your hands. It was a late autumn morning, the kind with damp light, the kind that made the leaves outside the front window look like stained glass. Cora stood behind the reception counter, a monochrome in charcoal and navy, a neatness made of habit, when the door chimed and in came the girl with the apricot scarf and a smile that looked like it knew every secret in town. "I'm Millie," she said, cheeks pink from the cold. "Your new assistant." Cora had hired her over the phone the week before. 2 assistants gone on maternity leave made necessity bold, but hearing the name and meeting the person were different experiences. Millie's hair was tucked into a messy knot with a magenta scrunchie, a tiny comet of color against the plain scrubs she wore. She set a canvas tote on the floor like she was waiting to be told she belonged. Cora felt the familiar click of her professionalism fall into place. "I'm Cora," she said. "Dr. Vance." She offered a smile she knew looked more like a straight line than an invitation. "We're glad you're here." As if the practice itself had a personality. As if the whir of the handpieces and the soft gossip of patients and the glass jars of cotton rolls were a family that would wrap around this young woman and make her feel at home. Cora wanted it to be true. She wanted to be the kind of woman who made other people feel less alone. In the operatory, Cora showed Millie where everything lived, the drawer of mirror heads and explorers, the curing light with its violet glow, the boxes of sterilization pouches stacked like slender books. "I label with dates," she said. "I like things chronological." Millie nodded, absorbing, eyes the color of wet bark, steady in a way that surprised Cora. There was a tattoo of a small fern at Millie's wrist, half hidden beneath the cuff of her glove when she pulled it on. Cora pretended not to notice and noticed anyway. Their first patient was a little boy with a gap-toothed laugh that turned into a wail when the overhead lamp came down. "I don't like that spaceship," he said, scooting down the chair as far as the bib would let him. His mother murmured apologetically. Already exhausted, Millie crouched to the boy's level like she'd been doing it all her life. "You know what? That lamp is picky. It only likes brave astronauts," she whispered. "Want to hold my hand while we show it we're brave?" She held out her gloved fingers and somehow it felt like a spell. The boy nodded, sniffed, took the hand. When the lamp lowered again, he blinked and didn't bolt. Cora watched the angle of their joined hands and the boy's breath settle, and something unclenched in her chest. She wasn't used to that kind of soft magic happening without her. Through the morning, Millie anticipated in increments. A saliva ejector passed before Cora asked, a tray lined with just enough cotton pellets, not too many. When Cora reached for the composite, their knuckles brushed, a spark as small as a winter static shock, and Cora ignored the irrational way her pulse noticed. She was careful and older and a dentist in the town where she had mowed lawns as a teenager. She had learned to keep her heart professionally sterilized. At noon, they split the kind of lunch you eat standing up, a granola bar each, a shared clementine. Millie's laughter was easy, surprising herself with it as much as anyone, and it filled the sterile hallway with something like warmth. "I always forget to eat unless someone puts food in my hand," she confessed, flicking a peel into the garbage. "Maybe it's a hazard of loving a busy place." Cora leaned against the counter and pretended to consider the window's weak light. "This place loves being loved," she said, a quip that landed oddly sincere. Millie tilted her head like she saw straight through it. "Do you always talk like the office is a person?" Millie asked, teasing, "Not unkind, only when the machines hiss at me," Cora deadpanned. Millie grinned, revealing one slightly crooked lateral incisor, which made Cora's ribs ache with the tenderness of it. People who were a little unpolished always felt more honest to her. In the afternoon, an elderly woman arrived with a cracked bridge and a tremor that made the bib clip dance at her collar. "My hands don't listen to me anymore," the woman said softly. "Mine barely listen either," Millie said, clasping the woman's wrist lightly as she helped her into the chair. "But that's why we make them do the important things over and over until they learn." The woman smiled, a small miracle in the sterile kind of day. Under the glow of the lamp, Cora worked and Millie watched the corners, ready with suction and reassurance. The room became a choreography, each of them finding the other's rhythm. When Cora reached for the curing light, Millie already had it angled just so, the purple beam settling like a kiss on the new composite. 3 seconds, Millie counted quietly. 2. 1. The beep sounded, and Cora felt strangely seen, like she had been the one guided gently from uncertainty to completion. By closing time the rain had shifted from a fine mist to a steady hush. Cora turned the sign on the door and Millie shrugged. Into her coat, the apricot scarf wound twice around her throat. "Do you walk?" Cora asked without thinking. The town arranged itself in small, wet lights outside the window. Millie lifted her shoulders in a yes. "Just a few blocks," Millie said. "If I cut through by the bakery, it smells like cinnamon. The whole way." Let me grab an umbrella, Cora said, surprising herself again. The old one in the supply closet snapped open with a hesitant click, a black flower that had seen better days. They stepped into the wet evening, both beneath its canopy, their hands near and not touching on the handle, the rain soft about them, the sidewalk slicked with reflected neon from the pharmacy. Cora felt calmer out here, with her precision tools out of reach. Are you settling in okay? She asked. Millie nodded, her breath making little clouds. I think so. It's quieter than the city. Like the air has time to listen before it answers. She sounded embarrassed and amused at herself in the same breath. Cora exhaled a laugh she didn't know she'd been holding. Maybe that's why I came back, she said, and then, because it felt like a kind of trust, she added, quieter makes it easier to hear what you've ignored. They reached the corner where Millie needed to turn, the bakery's window fogged with its own heat. Inside, a woman dusted sugar over cooling buns, snow falling again and again in miniature. Millie looked at Cora, the rain beating on the umbrella like a second sky. Thank you, she said. For the umbrella, and today. For making space. For me. Cora shook her head. You made your own space, she said. I just noticed it. Millie smiled, a soft, precise thing that found its way under Cora's ribs again. See you tomorrow, Dr. Vance. Cora, she corrected before. She thought better of it. Call me Cora. All right, Millie said, tasting the name. Good night, Cora. She stepped away, scarf bright as a small fire in the wet dark, and the umbrella felt suddenly too big, too empty. On the walk back to the office, Cora listened to the rain speak in its steady, patient language and realized she could hear herself beneath it, quiet, but there. In the mirrored glass of the door, she looked like someone softer than she had allowed in years. She locked up and held the key in her hand longer than necessary, feeling the shape of the day settle into memory, already knowing it would glint when she touched it again. She told herself not to make stories out of something as simple as a new assistant, a good day, a shared umbrella, but the heart, she knew, was always dangerous around small, honest things. It remembered the scent of cinnamon and apricots and clove, and it turned toward them, like a flower, like a patient, like a woman called Cora learning to listen to herself in the quiet. The next morning the fog lifted from the river in pale strips, the kind that make the street lamps look like they're still deciding whether to quit. Cora arrived before anyone, habit and restlessness wed together. She turned on the coffee maker. The autoclave, the tiny aquarium of the ultrasonic, each machine murmuring awake like parts of a sleeping animal. The umbrella leaned by the door, beads of yesterday's rain dried to ghost circles on the floor. She thought about apricot wool and the way her own name had sounded in Millie's mouth, and then she scolded herself by measuring out impression material like pennants. Millie arrived with the smell of the bakery clinging to her, cheeks rosy from the crisp air and a paper bag held reverently. Peace offering, she said. In case I used too many cotton pellets yesterday. You didn't, Cora said, more softly than she intended. Millie opened the bag to reveal 2 cinnamon knots, their lacquer of sugar shining. They ate them. Over the day's schedule, sweet grit sticking to gloves, they immediately changed, laughing at their own carefulness. You have a sugar mustache, Millie said, and Cora almost licked her thumb in reflex before catching herself, heat rising to her face at the intimacy of the imagined touch. The morning filled the way mornings do, with stories disguised as appointments. A retired music teacher who held her sorrow in her jaw until it cracked, a roofer with a molar like a crater, a teenage runner who tripped on the track and chipped her incisor right before senior pictures. It's okay, Millie told the girl, voice level as shoreline. We'll make the tooth remember how it's supposed to look. Cora sculpted composite in layers, feathering the edge and curing it in pulses of violet light. When the girl looked into the mirror, she covered her mouth and then let her hand fall, tears gathering. You fixed my face, she whispered, and Cora heard something loosen in both of them. Between patients, Millie moved like she was listening to music nobody else could hear, a rhythm that matched the rhythm of the office. You ever think teeth are just small, stubborn stars? She asked once, tossing a sterilization pouch into the basket with a neat flick. Burning and flickering and holding the shape of whole constellations of memory? Cora laughed, surprised at the accuracy of it. I think of them as little histories. They tell on us. Then I hope mine only tell the good parts, Millie said, looking down at her gloved hands like they might have secrets written on them. The fern tattoo at her wrist flashed and disappeared as she reached for the next tray. At lunch they went to the bakery because the sun had decided to show itself and the window seats were throwing coins of warm light across the tables. The woman at the counter, flour on her cheekbone like a thumbprint, called Millie by name already. Small towns did that, they learned you quickly or not at all. They sat with steaming bowls of tomato soup and a shared grilled cheese, the bread scarred beautifully by the press. The talk that had started in the hallways unfurled in the baking warmth. Why dentistry? Millie asked, tearing the sandwich into halves, and then, you could only call it generous, giving Cora the bigger one. Cora thought about the first time she had held a mirror and seen her father's molar like a map of a place she could read. Because these are hurts you can fix, she said. Not all of them, not always. But enough to keep faith. And because you like order, Millie teased gently. And because I like order, Cora admitted, smiling into her soup. Millie blew on her spoon. I like beginnings, she said. Doors. Start dates. New towns. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat and returned. I had to leave the old one fast. I was with someone who loved me the way a locked room loves a secret. Cora looked at her, at the way Millie's hands were steady even as her voice wavered. I'm sorry, she said, meaning the bigness of the word. It's okay now. Better. Then okay. Millie met her eyes and held them. I don't want to hide anymore. Not the way I love, not the way I laugh, not the way I line up cotton pellets just so. She grinned, easing the weight she had laid between them. Cora felt the small town lean in, imagined the tea shop whisper, the grocery line glance. She had never been secret about who she was, but she had been quiet, tidy, discreet as a sealed sterilization pouch. I'm not hiding either, she said, and it felt like placing a tool in a hand, handle first, trust forward. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the soup warming them from the inside out. Late afternoon brought an emergency, the kind that walks in with a hand cupped under the jaw and a word like sorry falling out with every step. An olive pit had bitten back, the premolar wore a hairline fracture that sang under cold water. Cora stayed, of course. Millie stayed without being asked. The office took on the amber hush of after hours. The radio played something old and forgiving. Under the light, Cora opened a delicate doorway into pain, irrigated, dried, laid a sedative like a blessing. Millie was there with the suction, with the gauze, with the measured, you're doing so well, that made grown men breathe easier. When the door finally closed behind the grateful patient, night had settled. The autoclave hummed its last cycle. They stood in the small pool of light over the sterilization sink, sleeves damp, adrenaline leaking away. Your hands, Millie said suddenly, and took Cora's left one like a bird she wanted to reassure. You worked through lunch and half of dinner. You must ache. Cora should have protested, but the truth floated up like mint on a tongue. A little, she admitted. Millie massaged lotion into the tendons, careful, clinical at first, then warmer, almost reverent. Cora felt each worry in her palm loosen and become something gentler. When Millie's thumb pressed into the meat of her thumb, the place both delicate and strong, Cora had to close her eyes. I can stop, Millie said. And don't, Cora whispered, and then opened her eyes because the sanctity of a moment like this deserved witnesses. They looked at each other, the room holding its breath, and then the phone rang, the timer on the sterilizer declaring itself done, and they laughed, the spell altered but not broken. Millie wiped her hands, cheeks flushed. Come on, she said. I'll walk you to your car. It smells like cinnamon out there again. At the door, she hesitated, then pulled a little box from her tote. Inside was a white enamel mug with a tiny fern painted on it. For the break room, she said, suddenly shy. For your coffee. For whatever beginnings look like when they're warm. Cora took it, the handle smooth against her skin, and felt something slot into place inside her like a crown seating. Perfectly. Thank you, she said. She meant the mug. She meant the day. She meant the careful way they were learning the shape of each other's courage. Outside, the evening smelled exactly like Millie had promised, of sugar and heat and a life that could rise, with the right hands, into something sweet enough to keep. By noon the sky had gone the color of a bruise, the kind of storm that eats the horizon until you forget there was ever a line between earth and cloud. The barometer on Cora's desk sulked toward low, the building's old bones creaked. She checked the emergency kit twice, then a third time, because the morning had felt jittery in her skin and habit steadied her. She was laying out files when Millie swept in with rain on her shoulders and a small flashlight clipped to her scrub top. Insurance against the apocalypse, Millie said, tapping it. The bakery lost power for a minute this morning. We're next. Of course you thought of that, Cora said, with something like relief disguised as humor. Millie's hair had slipped from its knot, damp curls softening her face in a way that made Cora's wide, careful world narrow to a point and glow. They made it through cleanings and a crown seat with only a few flickers. Mr. Alvarez arrived after lunch with kindness in his eyes and a gnawing ache he tried to apologize for. It'll be quick, Cora promised, settling him for the root canal that had been inevitable since last winter. She liked the way Endo narrowed time, tiny spaces. Clear steps, relief you could measure in millimeters and beeps. Halfway through shaping, the lights sighed and cut out. The radio died mid-harmony. The operatory swallowed its own light and then spat it back as the generators kicked the emergency circuits alive, bare, compromised brightness that made shadows look sharper. I've got you, Millie said, already. moving, already clicking her little flashlight on and handing Cora the headlamp from the emergency kit like they'd rehearsed. She steadied the suction with one hand, the beam with the other, voiced the anchor in the room. "You're doing great, Mr. Alvarez. We're halfway there." The headlamp felt absurd on Cora, but the cone of light was pure enough. She found the glide path again like muscle memory had a map. The storm rattled the windows, rain drummed. Millie's hip brushed the side of the chair. The closeness was professional and something else, shared breath and focus, the intimacy of two people making a delicate promise come true. "Files," Cora said, and Millie set the next size in her palm without looking away from the canal, as if the instrument were a word in a language they both spoke in their sleep. The purple pulse of the apex locator blinked steadily on battery backup. Cora's world narrowed to the fine feel of metal inside a hidden place and the warmth of another person's steadiness pressed lightly at her shoulder. When they finished, filled, sealed, the ache rehomed from tooth to memory, Mr. Alvarez blessed them in 2 languages and called them angels. Cora smiled at the floor because compliments always landed too loud in her chest. "Rest today," she told him. "Soft foods. Call if anything worries you." He promised and disappeared into the gray afternoon like a figure swallowed by a page turning. The storm stayed. The rest of the day canceled itself in a chorus of apologetic voicemails. The bakery had gone dark, the pharmacy, too. The office hummed on emergency power, those sparse, stern lights making everything honest. Cora closed the schedule and sat for a moment with her hands quiet in her lap. "You okay?" Millie asked, sliding onto the counter, swinging her feet. The flashlight beam skittering along the tile like a curious animal before she clicked it off. "I hate sending people away," Cora said. "I like finishing what I start." Millie nodded. "But sometimes the sky decides. We listen." She studied Cora for a second, then softened. "Come to my place? My stove's gas. I can make soup even if the world ends." Cora could have said no. She could have named boundaries or invented laundry or pointed at the rain. Instead she locked the door and the two of them stepped into weather together, umbrella a black grotto above them. The streetlights were out, the town's shape was suggested by candle glows in windows and the occasional blue flare of a pilot light catching as someone coaxed supper into being. Millie's apartment was 2 rooms over a shop that sold antiques that weren't old enough to admit it. She lit candles that smelled like basil and something clean. The place was spare and tender, a stack of library books, a fern thriving in a chipped pot, a string of postcards taped to the wall with neat black washi. The enamel mug with the painted fern sat on the counter like it had always belonged. "It looks like you," Cora said, before she could edit the truth out of the air. "Messy, green, and trying its best?" Millie grinned, rolling up her sleeves. "I'll take it." She put a pot on the blue flame and in went onions, garlic, a can of tomatoes, a handful of torn basil leaves that made the whole small world smell like summer remembered. Cora chopped a carrot because it felt good to be asked by a hand that wasn't the calendar. They ate perched on stools, bowls warm against their palms, the thunder farther now like a story someone else was telling. Shadows moved gently on the walls. Cora watched the way Millie blew on each spoonful, patient with heat, tender with her own mouth. She felt, suddenly, the shape of everything, the office and the storm and the dangerous simplicity of this, 2 women, the space between them measured in breaths. "My ex texted this morning," Millie said into a quiet that had become trust. Not absence. Nothing scary. Just her name, like a door left ajar. She shrugged, a small, helpless thing. "I blocked it. But it made the air weird." Cora folded her thumb into her palm, the way she did when she wanted to be gentle with herself. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Do you want me to?" "I don't know." She laughed at her own awkwardness, then let it be. "I can stand next to you in whatever way helps." Millie's eyes shone. "You already do," she said. Then, careful, "There's another thing. We should talk about the shape of us. If there is in US. You're my boss. I don't want anything we build to have a crack running through it from the beginning." Cora felt the question land and hold. She had been waiting for it, had been walking around it like a piece of furniture. "You know, is there even when the room is dark?" "I think about that," she said. "About ethics and power and gossip. About not wanting to hurt what we are so good at together when there's a patient in the chair." She swallowed, steadying. "I also think about you when I'm slicing a clementine. When I'm washing a cup. When I'm listening to a storm." Millie's breath hitched, then steadied. "I think about you when I'm buying a flashlight," she said, a laugh braided into the confession. "I don't want to hide. I don't want to hurry, either." "We can go slowly," Cora said. "We can write our own consent, out loud, as often as we need to. We can set rules and follow them, change them if we have to. We can be honest and careful and still be brave." Millie set her bowl down. The room tilted toward something true. "Can I kiss you?" she asked, voice like a fingertip on water. "Yes," Cora said, a word that felt like a door opening and a light coming on and the sound a crown makes when it seats perfectly. Millie crossed the little space. The kiss was soft and declarative, not a question but an answer, mint and tomato and candle smoke. The carefulness of two people who know that repair is a holy art. They stayed there for a long time, learning the occlusion of their mouths, the way their breaths fit, the way a palm on a cheek can say more than any eloquence. When they pulled back, the storm was a rumor and the candles had burned tunnels down into themselves. "Tomorrow," Millie said, forehead against Cora's, smile in her voice. "We'll draft the rules." "Tomorrow," Cora echoed. She looked at the blue pilot light steady in the stove, the fern on the windowsill, the shape of this small room holding the shape of their courage. "And then we'll follow them." They came in early, both of them, the office still blue with the stun of morning. The autoclave had not yet begun its steady, breathing purr. The aquarium quiet of the ultrasonic was a silence waiting to be named. Millie set the fern mug under the coffee machine and Cora pulled a legal pad from the drawer like a teacher pulling chalk. They looked at each other and then at the page. "The way you look at a bridge you mean to build rules," Millie said. "Soft but sure, promises," Cora countered, and wrote. They spoke them into being, careful as sutures, no touching impatient areas. Check-ins on Fridays, even when we're tired. Decisions about scheduling and pay to be made with a third set of eyes, Mrs. Ellis, the bookkeeper, so the lines stay clean. If either of us feels the balance tilt, we say it out loud. If this ever makes work unsafe for either of us, we will make a plan, even if the plan is complicated. Millie chewed the end of a pen and added, "No texting during root canals." "Obviously," Cora said, laughing, and the laughter snagged on something like relief. They signed at the bottom as if the paper itself were a witness, then tucked the page into a clear sleeve and taped it inside the breakroom cabinet behind. The tea bags. A sacrament, hidden but real. By the time the coffee had cooled to reasonable, the bell over the door chimed for the first patient, and the world remembered its shape. The morning ran on cleanings and small talk, on gloved courtesy and tiny bright victories. At 10, a call came in a rush of cold air. Mrs. Larkin had slipped on the ice outside the pharmacy and the front of her smile had paid the tax. "Bring her," Cora said, already moving. The storm had left the day sharp and clear, sunlight poured into the operatory like something generous. Mrs. Larkin arrived with a knit hat half on and panic stitched into her breath. "I have a book club on Saturday," she said, voice wobbling. "I can't read out loud like this." "We'll make it right," Millie said, gloving up. "We've got you." Cora loved that phrase, "we've got you," how it spread responsibility like a quilt and tucked it under a chin. She smoothed etch across enamel, that eerie seaside blue, rinsed, dried, painted bonding where tooth had become absence. The violet light hummed its cure, 3 seconds, 2, 1, and the new shape took. Millie angled the mirror just so, her hand steady as a benediction. When Cora finished carving the edge, feather thin, and polished it to the shine that says "This is yours." Again, Mrs. Larkin's eyes filled. "Oh," she breathed, hand splayed but not hiding. "Oh, you're artists." "Mechanics," Cora started, "out of habit." "Priests," Millie said, teasing, and Mrs. Larkin laughed, the sound bright and startled, like a bird thrown into warm air. As the door closed on gratitude and wool, Cora caught Millie's eye and felt the day settle into a particular kind of good. It wasn't the storm's urgency or the candle's hush. It was daylight and the honest hum of machines and the proof that what they were trying to build could stand up under ordinary weather. News traveled the way it always does in a small town, on the backs of scones, through the wire of the checkout line, in the soft rustle of library stacks. Cora found herself noticed but not inspected, the glare she'd braced for mostly absent. Mr. Alvarez returned for his follow-up and handed over a grocery sack of oranges and a foam dinosaur for the waiting room. "For the brave astronauts," he said, winking. "And for the angels." Angels again. Cora rolled her eyes at the ceiling after he left and Millie grinned. "You're going to have to accept that people like being taken care of," Millie said. Arranging the oranges in a bowl like little sons, not everything was gentle. An envelope without a return address turned up at Millie's apartment one afternoon, heavy with unsaid things. She brought it to Cora's kitchen and set it on the table. Like a small, dangerous animal. "She found the new address," Millie said. The window above the sink showed a winter that looked like it would hold. "Do you want me here if you open it?" Cora asked. Millie thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "I want to be the one who decides where the story ends," she said, and slid her thumb under the seal anyway. Inside, apologies in a familiar script, an invitation to try again, a paragraph that tried to make a cage sound like a room with a view. Millie read to the end, then folded the letter the way one folds a map one no longer needs. "No," she said to the empty air, with a steadiness that made Cora ache with something like pride. They carried the paper to the sink, touched a match. to its corner, and watched it curl into ash over water. The flame was small, but it made a ceremony of letting go. They made some things public on purpose. At the bakery's late-night winter market, with paper lanterns strung like low moons and the whole place smelling like cloves, they didn't perform anything. They just held hands while choosing a loaf and said hello to the people they knew. The baker pressed an extra knot into their bag with a conspiratorial smile, and the high school English teacher nodded. The kind of nod that says I see you and I am the kind of person who minds her own business but roots for good things. When a woman in a denim jacket murmured to a companion and tilted her chin in their direction, Cora felt the muscle in her jaw brace out of old habit. Millie squeezed her fingers once. Cora looked up and found the ceiling strung with light and thought, let the ceiling carry their murmurs, let the ceiling be strong. Back at the office, they pinned a Polaroid of the staff to the corkboard by the door, Cora deadpan, Millie with that sideways grin, a paper dinosaur tucked into the corner of the frame. The rules in the cabinet became less like a hidden treaty and more like a shared rhythm, the way you stop counting steps on a staircase you take every day. On Fridays, even when they were tired, they sat with tea and asked the questions they had promised to ask. Does this still feel fair? Are we still brave? Is there anything we need to change? Once, Millie said, I think I want to go back to school. Dental hygiene. More responsibility, more skill. She looked at Cora then, wary of the tilt. I don't want you to have to make that decision for me. You'll make it, Cora said. I'll write whatever letter you need and we'll find someone to sit in your chair and hold suction like a lullaby. And if you want to stay right here and keep building this with me, that's good too. She felt the twinge of the inevitable, how growth pulls and aches, but it came with its own kind of sweetness. They had promised to let daylight in. Daylight shows the dust and the shine. On a morning that felt like a clean sheet of paper, they took the umbrella out of the closet and realized it wasn't raining. The apricot scarf hung on a hook by the door anyway, a small fire waiting for weather. Cora polished a composite until she could see the overhead lamp in it, a tiny round moon. Millie counted off a cure, 3, 2, 1, her voice threaded into the day the way cinnamon had threaded itself through the first afternoons of this new life. They didn't hurry. They didn't hide. They walked to lunch sometimes, and sometimes they ate oranges over the schedule until their fingers smelled like sunshine. They listened when their hands ached, when their hearts did. On a Tuesday, in the pool of light over the sterilization sink, Millie leaned against Cora's shoulder, professional space maintained and private space promised, and said, I like the person I am with you. Cora turned her head and met eyes that had learned how not to flinch. Me too, she said. Outside, the town practiced its ordinary miracles, bread rising, packages arriving, people choosing kindness even when nobody was watching. Inside, a composite cured, a crown seated, a fern turned a new frond toward the window. The heart, dangerous around small, honest things, settled into something sturdy. They had chosen their tools. They had written their rules. They had taught their hands and their mouths how to say yes and wait and try again. In the clean hum of daylight, in the mint and clove and cinnamon of a life arranged with care, they kept choosing. Tomorrow, Millie said, flicking off the operatory light at closing, the room cooling into a gentler shade of itself. Tomorrow, Cora echoed, and locked the door. The key felt right in her hand. The day felt finished and open, both. When they stepped out into the evening, they left the umbrella on its hook. The sky, at last, had nothing to say but clear. Subscribe for more cinnamon slow burns and consent strong love stories.